Tonight's lecture is over evolution and behavior. Our learning objectives will be able to explain how animal behaviors are shaped by natural selection in an attempt to increase fitness. We will be able to discuss cooperation, selfishness, and altruism from an evolutionary approach. We will be able to describe differences in reproductive investment by males and females, and we will also be able to discuss how animal communication and signals evolve. What are your favorite things to eat? Perhaps donuts or hot fudge sundaes top your list, or maybe bananas or cheeseburgers and fries. One thing is almost certain about the food preferences of any human: the list will be filled with calorie-rich options. In controlled studies, humans demonstrate a clear and consistent preference for sweet and fatty foods. Specifically, when people compare variations of a food dish that differ in the amount of sugar and/or fat, their preference for the dish increases as its sugar concentration increases up to a point, after which adding more sugar makes the food less preferable. But the preferences become stronger and stronger as the food's fat content increases. In short, we prefer sweet but not too sweet foods that are packed with as much fat as possible. So watch birds in a field and you will see they too have preferences. A starling, for example, walks through the grass, probing the ground and only occasionally picking up something to eat, such as a beetle larva. Shore crabs also have preferences. They favor the mussels that provide the greatest amount of energy relative to the energy required to open the mussel. The largest mussels take too long to open. The smallest mussels are easily opened but don't provide enough caloric content to make an effort worthwhile. Thus, the research shows shore crabs prefer medium-sized mussels. Animals have taste preferences for a reason. Whereas plants can create their own food, all animals must consume materials from which they can extract the most energy and acquire essential nutrients. If they don't, they die. Taste preferences are a direct result of an interaction between the matter we eat and the molecules within our taste buds. Those molecules, in turn, are produced by a large number of genes that have been shaped by natural selection. Taste preferences directly influence the feeding choices of animals, and these choices affect the number of offspring they can produce and their evolutionary fitness. In this way, natural selection shapes feeding behaviors just as it can bring about changes in physical structures. So before we continue, let's define what we mean by behavior. Behavior encompasses any of the actions performed by an organism, often in response to its environment, or the actions of another organism. Feeding behavior is only one of many behaviors influenced by natural selection. The full scope of animal behavior is vast and varied, including conflict and cooperation, competition and predation, courtship and mate choice, communication and learning. In Chapter 10, we learned about the evolutionary origins of many physical traits and the general process by which natural selection can lead to the evolution of organisms adapted to their environments. In this chapter is just as much a part of an organism's phenotype as are its anatomical structures, and that behavior and behavioral traits are produced and shaped by natural selection. And that brings us to our take-home message for section 11.1. Behavior encompasses all of the actions performed by an organism. Behavior is a part of an organism's phenotype, and as such it can be produced and shaped by natural selection. In his study of pea plants, Mendel described a single gene for plant height that caused a plant to be either tall or short. The production of a trait such as plant height, however, is not completely genetically determined. Certain environmental conditions, such as the type of soil and the availability of water, nutrients, and sunlight, also influence a plant's height. In fact, nearly all physical traits of all organisms are the products not only of genes but also of environmental conditions. Likewise, when it comes to the production of behaviors, the environment plays an important role. The degree to which a behavior depends on the environment for expression, however, varies a great deal. At one extreme are behaviors, called instincts or innate behaviors, that don't require any environmental input to develop. Innate behaviors are present in all individuals in a population and do not vary much from one individual to another or over an individual's lifespan. An example of innate behavior is a fixed action pattern, a sequence of behaviors triggered in response to a specific sign called a sign stimulus. This behavior pattern requires no learning but does not vary among individuals and, once started, runs to completion. So here are a couple examples. Egg retrieval in geese. When a goose spots an egg outside its nest, which is a sign stimulus, that observation triggers a fixed action pattern. The goose rolls the egg back to the nest using a side-to-side motion, keeping the egg tucked underneath its bill. Once started, a goose continues the side-to-side motion even if the egg is taken away on the way to the nest. Second is aggressive displays and attacks by stickleback fish. The bellies of male stickleback fish turn bright red when the breeding season arrives. During this time, the sight of a red belly, a sign stimulus, triggers a male stickleback to react aggressively to any other male stickleback. In fact, the males become antagonistic at the sight of anything remotely resembling a red belly. To that end, one researcher even noticed that his sticklebacks performed aggressive displays every day when a red truck drove by his window. And that brings us to our take-home message for section 11.2. Instincts, or innate behaviors, develop without any environmental input, are present in all individuals in a population, and vary little from one individual to another or over an individual's lifespan. A fixed action pattern is a sequence of actions that requires no learning, does not vary, and runs to completion once started. Then, in contrast to innate behaviors, some behaviors are acquired and modified over time in response to the individual's experiences. That is, they require learning. The ease of learning can differ dramatically for behaviors. Some come relatively easily and are learned by most individuals in a population, while other behaviors are less easily learned. Consider fear of snakes, a trait common to most primates, including humans. In the wild, rhesus monkeys are afraid of snakes. The sight of a snake causes the monkeys to engage in fear-related responses, including making alarm calls and rapidly moving away from the snake. Observations of monkeys in captivity, however, reveal that they aren't born with a fear of snakes. Captive rhesus monkeys will reach over a plastic model of a snake to get a peanut. But as experiments show, monkeys learn to fear snakes if they see another monkey terrified at the sight of a snake, even if they see the reaction on television. Ignoring the peanut, the now frightened monkeys scream and move as far away from the artificial snake as possible. Studies on humans show an equally easily learned fear of snakes. We respond with sweaty palms and an increased heart rate. When behaviors are learned easily by all or nearly all individuals, this is called prepared learning. In addition to the snake-fearing behavior of monkeys, examples of prepared learning abound. The acquisition of language in humans is a dramatic example. Most children begin to talk around 1 year of age. By the age of 3, they understand most rules of sentence construction, and by age 6, a native English speaker has a vocabulary of about 13,000 words. So let's return to our rhesus monkey experiments. Researchers altered the snake videotape to show how a monkey having the same fear reaction in response to a flower or a toy rabbit. After watching this tape, the captive monkeys, which had never seen flowers or rabbits or snakes, did not learn to fear either flowers or rabbits. These observations point to an evolutionary basis for the acquisition of certain behaviors. Organisms are well prepared to learn behaviors, such as snake avoidance, that were important to their ancestors' survival and reproductive success over the course of their evolutionary history. By comparison, they are less prepared to learn behaviors irrelevant to their evolutionary success, such as flower or rabbit avoidance. So given that approximately 40,000 people are killed by guns in the United States each year, while fewer than 36 people are killed by snakes, it would seem that we ought to be very afraid of guns and relatively unconcerned about snakes. But humans are built in just the opposite way. The likely explanation is that evolution can be slow in producing populations that are adapted to their environments. That is, evolutionary change cannot always keep up with a rapidly, in evolutionary terms, changing environment. Like all genes, any genes involved in behaviors have been handed down to us from our ancestors. Snakes caused many human deaths over the course of our evolutionary history. In contrast, guns did not kill a single person until very recently on the evolutionary timescale. Accordingly, we still fear our ancient enemy, the snake, and have no instinctual response to novel threats, regardless of how deadly. And that brings us to our take-home message for section 11.3. Some behaviors are influenced by the individual's environment, require some learning, and are often modified over time in response to past experiences. Organisms are better prepared to learn behaviors that were important to the reproductive success of their ancestors than behaviors irrelevant to their species' evolutionary success. Okay, so let me ask the question, why do humans or any other animals have sex? Is it because they are thinking robot-like? Must maximize reproductive success? Must maximize reproductive success? Of course not. Yet, they go about their lives behaving as if they were guided by precisely such thoughts. An animal that experiences pleasure when it has sex has the incentive to seek out additional opportunities to experience that pleasure. As long as reproductive success is enhanced in the process, it is not necessary, from a fitness standpoint, for the animal to deliberately seek that outcome. In other words, natural selection doesn't have to produce animals that consciously try to maximize their reproductive success. Instead, it only needs to produce animals that behave in a way that actually results in reproductive success. And this outcome will occur if organisms experience a pleasurable sensation by having sex. It's like an evolutionary shortcut. Behaviors that lead to a specific outcome that increases the animal's relative reproductive success will be favored by natural selection as long as they are heritable. With a little trickery, we can investigate experimentally whether natural selection sometimes results in such evolutionary shortcuts. Consider the example of egg retrieval in geese. When an egg falls out of the nest, a goose retrieves it in exactly the same way every time. Is a goose able to do this because it vigilantly keeps tabs on all of its eggs? This seemed to be the case, at least until researchers decided to trick some geese. The researchers learned that putting any object that remotely resembles an egg near a goose's nest triggers the retrieval process. Geese will retrieve beer cans, doorknobs, and a variety of other objects that will not increase the animal's reproductive success. Moreover, if multiple egg-like items are just outside the nest, the goose will retrieve the largest item first, even when it's an artificial egg the size of a basketball. Thus, natural selection can produce organisms that exhibit clearly maladaptive, in other words, fitness decreasing behaviors in experiments if, in nature, individuals' performance of these simple actions nearly always leads to fitness increasing behaviors. So taking an evolutionary approach to the study of the behavior of animals, including humans, is increasingly common. In a synthesis of evolutionary biology and psychology called evolutionary psychology, researchers view the human brain and human behaviors, including emotions, as traits produced by natural selection. The evolutionary approach to studying behavior has also influenced the field of economics. And that brings us to our take-home message for section 11.4. If a certain heritable behavior in natural situations usually increases an animal's relative reproductive success, that behavior will be favored by natural selection. The natural selection of such behaviors does not require the organism to consciously try to maximize its reproductive success. Moving on, if we look closely, we can see many behaviors in the animal world that appear to be altruistic behaviors. That is, they seem to come at a cost to the individual performing them while benefiting the recipient. When discussing altruism, we define costs and benefits in terms of their contribution to an individual's fitness. So take the case of the Australian social spider. After giving birth to approximately 50 hungry spiderlings, the mother feeds her offspring with her own body as it slowly liquefies into a nutritious fluid that the newborn spiders consume. Over the course of about 40 days, her offspring literally eat her alive. They ultimately kill their mother, but start their lives well-nourished. The cost to the mother is huge. She is unable to produce any more offspring, but there is a clear benefit to her many offspring. Such seemingly altruistic behavior puzzled Darwin. Natural selection, he believed, generally works to produce selfish behaviors that improve an individual's own reproductive success relative to that of other individuals. Alleles that cause the individual carrying them to help increase other individuals' reproductive success at the expense of his or her own success should decrease their relative frequency in a population. Darwin worried that if the apparent instances of altruism were indeed truly altruistic, they would prove fatal to his theory. As it turns out, Darwin's theory is safe. Virtually all of the apparent acts of altruism in the animal kingdom prove, on closer inspection, to be not truly altruistic. Instead, they have evolved as a consequence of either kin selection or reciprocal altruism. So, kindness toward close relatives, or what we call kin selection, occurs when an individual assists a close relative in a way that increases the relative's fitness enough to offset the individual's own decrease in fitness. And secondly, kindness toward unrelated individuals, or reciprocal altruism, describes a two-part interaction beginning with one individual, a helper, assisting another, the recipient, in a way that initially decreases the helper's fitness while benefiting the recipient. The recipient, however, then becomes more likely to return the favor in the future. If that future action more than offsets the helper's initial decrease in fitness, the helper is, in fact, increasing his or her own fitness overall. Seen in this light, both kin selection and reciprocal altruism can lead to the evolution of behaviors that are apparently altruistic, but in actuality are beneficial from an evolutionary perspective to the individuals engaging in the behaviors. In the next two sections, we'll explore kin selection and reciprocal altruism in more detail. We investigate some of the many testable predictions about when acts of apparent kindness should occur. When considering these situations, it is important to note that even though genes play a central role in cooperation and conflict, people's ability to override impulses towards selfishness is responsible for some of the rich diversity in human behavior that we see around us. And that brings us to our take-home message for section 11.5. In most cases of behaviors that appear to be altruistic, the behaviors are not truly altruistic. They have evolved as a consequence of either kin selection or reciprocal altruism, and, from an evolutionary perspective, are beneficial to the individual engaging in the behavior. Moving on, The grasslands of the western United States are home to large colonies of Belding's ground squirrels, which live in underground burrows. These colonies, which may include hundreds or thousands of individuals, attract many birds of prey. But the squirrels have a system for reducing predation risks, and that system resembles a neighborhood watch program. When an aerial predator approaches, one squirrel may stand on top of a burrow and produce a loud whistle-like alarm call, warning the colony of the impending danger. On hearing this alarm, the other squirrels quickly take cover in their burrows, reducing their risk of death. Making an alarm call is a very dangerous activity. About half of the time that alarm call is made, the caller is killed by the predator. Some squirrels see predators and make alarm calls, while other squirrels see predators and keep quiet. It turns out that approximately 80% of the squirrels making alarm calls are female. And older females are 5 times more likely than young females to make alarm calls. Why are these particular squirrels making the alarm calls? Why would any squirrel make an alarm call? The age and sex of the squirrels reveal that alarm calling is about protecting relatives. The more kin an individual is likely to have, the more likely that individual is to sound the alarm. Males travel long distances to live in new colonies shortly after reaching maturity, so most adult males don't live near their parents, siblings, or other relatives except their own offspring. Females, on the other hand, remain near the area where they were born and are likely to have many close relatives nearby. Older females, then, are likely to have the largest number of relatives. The biologist W.D. Hamilton expressed the idea of kin selection in which one individual assisting another can compensate for its own decrease in fitness if it helps a close relative in a way that increases the relative's fitness. Both benefactor and recipient share alleles that are preserved through the act of altruistic appearing behavior. So although it might seem as if individuals are acting selflessly or altruistically, they are really acting in the best interests of their genes. So Belding's ground squirrels are probably unaware of how closely they are related to the squirrels around them, but it's likely that natural selection has led to an evolutionary shortcut that allows them to behave as if they did know. In a clever test of this idea, researchers trapped adult female squirrels and relocated them to distant ground squirrel colonies in which they had no close relatives. If the transplanted females were able to determine exactly how closely they were related to the squirrels around them, they would not make alarm calls. To do so would put the caller at risk without benefiting her genes. What researchers found, though, was that transplanted females were just as likely to sound the alarm in the colony of strangers as they were in their home territory surrounded by close relatives. It seems that female ground squirrels have evolved to follow a simple rule that says, if I am an older female, I behave as if I have many close relatives around me. Based on the idea of kin selection, we need to redefine what is meant by an individual's fitness. An individual's fitness is not just his or her total reproductive output, but also includes the reproductive output that individuals bring about their seemingly altruistic behaviors towards close kin. This redefined measure of fitness is called inclusive fitness. So no two individuals, with the exception of identical twins, are genetically identical. And because different individuals do not share all of the same alleles, we expect that they should experience some conflict. Just as close relatives are more likely to help each other than are strangers, the converse is also true. The less closely related two individuals are, the more likely they are to experience conflict. Male lions, for example, on taking over a pride usually kill unrelated cubs, although females defend their young aggressively. This causes the females to become reproductively ready sooner than they would be if they continued nursing their cubs. The idea of kin selection gives rise to many predictions about conflict among humans. One of these notions is that child abuse, when it occurs, is more likely to involve abuse by a child's step-parent than abuse by his or her biological parent. Is this the case? Numerous studies across many different cultures, including an evaluation of 20,000 reports from the American Humane Association in the United States, support what has been called the Cinderella effect. These findings included, for example, an estimate that the probability that a preschooler will be abused is about 1 in 3,000 for a child living with two biological parents with whom he or she shares considerable genetic relatedness, but is 40 in 3,000 for a child living with a step-parent with whom he or she has no genetic relatedness. The difference in risk persists even when the socioeconomic factors are taken into account and has been noted in multiple other cultures. It is extremely important to note, however, that in the vast majority of step families, no abuse occurs. And that brings us to our take-home message for section 11.6. Kin selection is apparently altruistic behavior in which an individual that assists a genetic relative compensates for its own decrease in reproductive output by helping increase the relative's reproductive output and, consequently, its own inclusive fitness. Moving on. As we saw in the previous section, when behavior appears to be altruistic, this is frequently because individuals are helping kin. But does any apparently altruistic behavior occur toward non-relatives? Yes, but not much. In this section, we'll explore the conditions that give rise to reciprocal altruism, how it may have arisen, and why it is so common among humans but so rare among other animal species. We start by examining one species with well-documented altruistic-appearing behavior, the vampire bat. Vampire bats live in social groups of 8 to 12 mostly unrelated individuals roosting primarily in caves and hollow trees, typically with hundreds of other bats. They feed by landing on large mammals such as cattle and horses, piercing their target's skin with razor-sharp teeth and drinking blood that flows from the wound. Because of their small body size, about the size of your thumb, and their high metabolic rate, vampire bats must consume almost their entire body weight in blood each night. If they go for more than about 60 hours without finding a meal, they are likely to die from starvation. Here's where the apparent altruism comes in. A bat that has not found food and is close to death will beg food from a bat that has recently eaten. In many cases, the bat that has just eaten will regurgitate some of the blood it has consumed into the mouth of the hungry bat, saving it from starvation. This act obviously has very high benefit for the recipient of the blood, but it comes at a cost to the sharing bat, which loses some of its caloric content of its original meal. Kin selection is responsible for some of the blood sharing. Females often regurgitate blood for their own offspring, but in many cases, bats give blood to unrelated individuals. How might this behavior have arisen? To answer this question, it is important to note 3 other features of vampire bats. First, they can recognize more than 100 distinct individual bats. Second, bats that receive blood donations from non-relatives reciprocate significantly more than average with the bats that have shared blood with them. Third, bats do not have a history of helping each other generationally, do not regurgitate for each other. The evolution of this apparent altruism may be due to the fact that bats giving blood are repaid the favor when they are in need of blood. In other words, the act only seems to be selfless. In actuality, it is selfish. With such reciprocal altruism, both individuals at different encounters give up something of relatively low value in exchange for getting something of great value at a later time when they need it most. In other words, they are storing goodwill in another individual and are protected from some of the world's uncertainties. So taken together, studies of bats and other animals show that reciprocal altruism can evolve if the following 3 conditions are met. 1. Repeated interactions occur among individuals with opportunities to be both the donor and recipient of altruistic appearing acts. Second, the benefits to the recipient are significantly greater than the cost to the donor. And third, there is an ability to recognize and punish cheaters, that is, individuals that are recipients of altruistic appearing acts but do not return the favor. In absence of these conditions, selfishness is expected to be the norm among unrelated individuals. The three conditions required for the evolution of reciprocal altruism are not satisfied in many animal species, which may be why altruistic appearing behavior among unrelated individuals is rare. So, as rare as it is in other species, reciprocal altruism is very common among humans. Friendship is built on reciprocity and is almost universal. The opportunity for friendship may be enhanced by our long lifespan and our ability to recognize thousands of faces and keep track of cheaters. These features are essential for individuals engaging in reciprocal altruism because an individual becomes very vulnerable when he or she acts in an altruistic manner toward an unrelated individual. The risk is that the altruism will not be repaid, in which case the cheater enjoys greater fitness than the altruist. While cooperators, those who repay altruistic appearing behavior, have evolutionary advantages over loners, this advantage disappears if the interaction is unequal. The importance of keeping track of cheaters and identifying good potential reciprocity partners or good cooperators may be why humans are so interested in social information and seemingly trivial gossip. As with many of the complex behaviors we have explored, humans probably use some rules of thumb when making decisions about reciprocal altruism. This might include keeping track of all available social information to best identify promising individuals with whom to engage in reciprocal altruism. Researchers have hypothesized that the evolution of maintaining an interest in social information, while valuable in most contexts, may today have some maladaptive manifestations. With so much data now available at our fingertips, we may find ourselves interested in and distracted by the social lives of the latest YouTube sensation, pop icons, and other individuals whom we'll most likely never meet. And that brings us to our take-home message for section 11.7. In reciprocal altruism, an individual engages in an altruistic appearing act toward another individual when likely to get something of value at a later time. Reciprocal altruism occurs only if individuals have repeated interactions and can recognize and punish cheaters, conditions satisfied in the human but in few other species. Moving on. The world in which alarm calling evolved did not include biologists with pickup trucks who trapped female squirrels, drove them for long distances, and released them into colonies of unrelated individuals. So when a female squirrel suddenly finds herself in this alien environment, her evolved behaviors can no longer be expected to be adaptive, no more than a human could be expected to survive on the moon. Likewise, individuals' genes and all the traits they influence cannot change overnight. Adaptation to a new environment takes time, and the more quickly an environment changes, the more likely that it is that the adaptations, including evolved behaviors of a population, will no longer be appropriate. Let's consider another human example: donating money to refugees on another continent. To understand how natural selection could lead to this behavior, we need to understand a bit about human evolutionary history. We know from archaeological deposits that for more than 2 million years, our ancestors lived as hunters and gatherers in small groups of a few hundred people at most. Their success depended on joint efforts against predators and in killing prey. Being quote-unquote nice paid off when the prospect of hunting alone or sleeping outside the camp meant almost certain death. The loners died, so we are descended from those humans who could work well with others. Only recently, the blink of an eye in evolutionary time, have humans invented agriculture, industrialization, and means of food production and distribution. Now, most of us have easy access to unlimited amounts of food, and our typical group size has increased dramatically. On a given day, you may see 10 or even 100 times as many people as a hunter-gatherer ancestor might have seen. Additionally, if you were a hunter-gatherer, you would have many opportunities to help and in turn to be helped by everyone in your group. Reciprocity paid. Accordingly, humans evolved so that the altruistic act gave us pleasure, stimulating parts of our brain in ways that made us want to repeat such actions. It is with this brain that you approach the issue of giving assistance to refugees halfway across the world or a homeless family somewhere in the United States. It is almost certain that you will not have repeated interactions with any of those people. From an evolutionary perspective, your action will almost certainly not increase your fitness. But in the world in which humans spent most of their evolutionary history, such altruistic appearing behavior would most likely have been reciprocated at some future time, and thus your instincts guide you to and reward you for your kindness. So, from the weight-controlled difficulties that come from easy access to food to alarm calling in transplanted squirrels, when there is a mismatch between the environment organisms are in and the environment to which they are evolutionarily adapted, we expect and we see behaviors and other traits that are not evolutionarily adaptive. Understanding evolutionary mismatch and the process of natural selection can help us to make sense of some of these observations. And that brings us to our take-home message for section 11.8. When there is a mismatch between the environment organisms are in and the environment to which they are adapted, the traits, including behaviors they exhibit, are not necessarily evolutionarily adaptive. Moving on. Casual observers of nature frequently see individuals acting in ways that appear altruistic, even though these individuals are truly acting, from the perspective of evolutionary fitness, in their own selfish interests. This raises the question of whether evolution ever leads to behaviors that are good for the species or population, but detrimental to the individual exhibiting the behavior. This is a process called group selection. It might seem that evolution would favor individuals that behave in a manner that benefits the group, even if it comes at a cost to the individual's own inclusive fitness. But this does not happen. Behaviors that reduce an individual's fitness relative to that of other individuals in the population are not likely to evolve. Let's look at an example. Imagine a new allele in a population, perhaps arising through mutation, that causes the individual carrying the allele to double its reproductive output, even though this might spell doom for the species as the increasing numbers of individuals overuse their resources. An individual carrying this quote-unquote selfish allele will pass on more copies of the allele to its offspring than an individual carrying the alternative quote-unquote normal allele. The selfish offspring, in turn, will pass on the selfish allele at a higher rate than the alternative allele is passed on. Excessive selfish consumption of necessary resources will occur. This scenario may lead to extinction of the species, yet it still occurs. Now consider what happens when a new allele appears that causes an individual to reduce its reproductive output below what is best for the individual's fitness. Such a quote-unquote selfless allele does not increase its market share relative to the alternative quote-unquote normal or quote-unquote selfish allele, even if it benefits the group by reducing the likelihood that the population will go extinct. Instead, natural selection generally causes increases in the frequency of alleles that benefit the individual carrying them, even when this advantage comes at the expense of the group. In some special situations, it is possible for natural selection to lead to group selection. However, the stringent conditions necessary for this to occur are so rarely found in nature that we almost never see it. And that brings us to our take-home message for section 11.9. Behaviors that are good for species or population but detrimental to the fitness of the individual exhibiting such behaviors are not generally produced in a population under natural conditions. Moving on, how many babies can a woman produce over her lifetime? The number is probably higher than you would guess. A Russian woman had 69 children as a result of 27 pregnancies. But even this high number is greatly exceeded by the 888 offspring produced by one man, the Emperor of Morocco, from 1672 to 1727. Among other species of mammals, the pattern is consistent. A male elephant seal can produce 100 offspring, while the maximum produced by a female over her lifetime is 8. A male red deer can produce 24 offspring, while the maximum produced by a female is 14. The very definition of male and female hinges on a physical difference between the sexes. Recall from Chapter 8 that in species with two distinct sexes, a female is defined as the sex that produces the larger gamete, while a male produces the smaller gamete. At conception, the mother's material and energetic contribution to the offspring, in other words, her reproductive investment, exceeds that of the father. This is true for all animals, whether mammals, birds, insects, or sharks. It is also true for plants. Not only are female gametes larger, but they also tend to be relatively immobile and produced in smaller numbers, while male gametes are more plentiful and very motile. So, the difference in the number of gametes that males and females can produce means that males have the potential to produce many, many more offspring than females. Put another way, a male's total reproductive output, the lifetime number of offspring he can produce, tends to increase as the number of females he is able to fertilize increases. A female, on the other hand, does not generally increase her reproductive success by mating with additional males after the first. Because additional matings usually lead to greater increases in reproduction and fitness for males, selective pressure has resulted in the evolution of some differences in male and female reproductive behavior. For males, one of the most effective ways to maximize their reproductive success is to find and gain access to mating opportunities with additional females. For females, an effective way to maximize their reproductive success is to put more effort into parenting and less into mating. So, when it comes to putting more effort into parenting, two physical differences that can exist between males and females are particularly important. First, in species with internal fertilization, which includes most mammals, fertilization takes place inside of the female. The offspring also grow and develop within the female's body. The amount of energy that females invest in reproduction is therefore much greater than males' investment, and females' reproductive investment also limits their reproductive output. They can be pregnant only once at a time. A second key physical difference between females and males occurs in mammals. Lactation takes place in females and not in males, with a very small number of exceptions. In these species, then, nurturing during both pregnancy and lactation can be accomplished only by the female. Although across all animals, the egg is bigger and more costly to make than the sperm, the physical differences between the sexes in the early nurturing, in other words, the gestation and feeding of the offspring, can vary considerably. In some cases, male and female investments become more nearly equal after fertilization. For example, in birds, before emergence of the chicks, much of the development of the fertilized egg is external. The female lays an egg, but the male or female can protect and incubate the developing embryo. Furthermore, birds do not lactate. Instead, once hatched, the chicks must be fed, a task that can be done by both parents. Accordingly, in many bird species, the maximum lifetime reproductive output of males and females is similar. For example, in the kittiwake gulf, the largest number of offspring produced by a male is 26, while for the female the number is 28. The external fertilization that takes place in fish and amphibian species further reduces the female's reproductive investment. She does not spend any energy as the fertilized eggs develop into embryos. Another profound consequence of internal fertilization is that a male cannot be 100% certain that any offspring a female produces are his progeny. Because it is possible for a female to mate with multiple males, any of whom could be the father, male mammals and birds will always have some degree of paternity uncertainty. And that brings us to our take-home message for section 11.10. In mammals and many other animals, physical differences between the sexes have led to the evolution of differences in male and female reproductive behavior. Moving on. Suppose you're on your college campus and a person of the opposite sex comes up to you and says, "Hi, I've been noticing you around campus. I find you very attractive. Would you go out with me tonight?" What percentage of men would answer yes? What percentage of women? In a study conducted at Florida State University in 1978 and 1982, the percentage answering yes was 50% for both males and females. Now imagine the question was, would you have sex with me tonight? Among men, 75% said yes. Among the women, not a single one said yes. What could explain the differences between the responses of men and women? Studies of male-female differences in selectiveness about sexual partners, drawing on a wide range of human cultures, including many far removed from Western influence, reveal a consistent difference in men's and women's willingness to have sex. Humans, like nearly all mammals, are characterized by a greater initial reproductive investment by females. For females, the cost of a poor mating choice can have significant consequences. Pregnancy and lactation with offspring from a low-quality male or a male who does not provide any parental investment or access to resources. For a male, the consequences of a poor choice are less dire, little beyond the time and energy involved in mating. So, the differences in the sexual behavior of male and females across the animal kingdom have evolved. The sex with the greater energetic investment in reproduction is more discriminating about mating, and members of the sex with the lower energetic investment in reproduction compete among themselves for access to the higher investing sex. When bush crickets mate, the male loses about a quarter of its body weight in contributing to a massive ejaculate, which the female uses for energy. This input can represent up to 1/10 of her lifetime caloric intake. Not surprisingly, then, male crickets are very choosy when it comes to selecting a mate. They reject small females that would produce relatively few offspring. Females, for their part, spend much effort courting males. The sex with the greater reproductive investment must be choosy. A poor choice of mate could be disastrous. The sex with the lower initial reproductive investment, usually males, on the other hand, is not made vulnerable through its mating choices. The matings are of little energetic consequence. The point of the greatest vulnerability for males comes when they provide parental care to the offspring. Due to paternity uncertainty, the male may potentially be investing in offspring that are not his own. This has significant evolutionary costs. Rather than increasing his own fitness, he is increasing the fitness of another male. Females, conversely, are less vulnerable at the point of providing parental care. A female can be completely certain that the offspring she gives birth to are her own. So as we explore some general patterns of reproductive behavior, it is important to keep two critical points in mind. 1. Male and female behaviors vary tremendously across species. We can see general behavioral patterns among animals, but these patterns are not necessarily universal features of their biology. A reasonable skepticism is important when identifying and interpreting broad trends across large groups of species. And 2, throughout history, people have often sought to use observations and scientific findings to justify a wide variety of discriminatory thoughts and behaviors. For example, that if male mammals, quote-unquote, naturally tend to be less faithful to their mates, this reduces humans' responsibility for their behavior. Such thinking ignores the tremendous variation in behavior among species and the power cultural norms and socialization to influence human behavior. And that brings us to our take-home message for section 11.11. Differing patterns of reproductive investment in reproduction makes males and females vulnerable at different stages of the reproductive process. This has contributed to the evolution of differences in their sexual behavior. The sex with the greater energetic investment in reproduction is more discriminating about mates. Members of the sex with a lower energetic investment in reproduction compete among themselves for access to the higher investing sex. Moving on, female choosiness and the male-male competition it leads to tends to increase the likelihood that a female will select only those males that have plentiful resources or relatively high-quality genes. Either is beneficial to the female, allowing her to produce more or better offspring, where quote-unquote better may mean increased disease resistance or physical traits that will be found attractive by future mates. Female choosiness is manifested by one or more of four general rules. The first rule is to mate only after subjecting a male to courtship rituals. In many bird species, the female requires the male to perform an elaborate and time-consuming courtship dance before she will mate with him. For the western grebe, for example, this dance involves fancy dives into the water, graceful hovering, and flamboyant twists and turns. The courtship can go on for several days, but if the male passes the audition, he can generally be counted on to stick around to see a brood through hatching and early care. Second, mate only with a male who controls valuable resources. Territorial defense is a common means by which males compete for access to females. Among Arctic ground squirrels, for example, a female chooses a mate based in part on the territory he defends. With greater quality and quantity of resources in his territory, a male is better able to attract females. The female will reside there after mating, and her reproductive success can be increased if the territory is rich in resources. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice, 1813. Third, mate only with the male who contributes a large parental investment up front. Better than a pledge to commit resources to future offspring is an actual exchange in which the male gives his parental investment up front in the form of resources. In the hanging fly, for example, a female will not mate with the male unless he brings her a big piece of food called a nuptial gift, usually a dead insect. The larger the food item, the longer she will mate, and the more she eats, the larger the number of eggs she will lay. After about 20 minutes of mating, though, when a male has transferred all of the sperm that he can, he is likely to break off from mating and take back whatever remains of the nuptial gift. He may then use the remnants to try to attract another mate. Nuptial feeding is common among birds and insects. Fourth, mate only with the male who has a valuable physical attribute. Male-male competition for the chance to mate with females can also take a more literal form, actual physical contests. Across the animal kingdom, from dung beetles to hippopotamuses, male-to-male contests determine dominance rankings of males. Females then mate primarily with the highest-ranking males. In a similar process, females sometimes base their choice on some physical attribute, such as antler size in red deer, the bright red chest feathers of frigate birds, or the elaborate tail feathers of the male peacock. In each case, for the female, the physical feature serves as an indicator of the relative quality of the male, possibly because the feature is correlated with the male's health. So, with so many examples of male-male fighting as part of courtship rituals, it is reasonable to ask, why is it so rare for females to fight? And why do females generally not have to advertise their health with flashy feathers or other ornamentation? The answer is that as long as females are making the greater investment in reproduction, nearly any male will mate with them. Consequently, there is nothing more to be gained by trying to outcompete other females or otherwise attract the attention of males. Among humans, social and cultural values have powerful influences over mating behavior, complicating interpretation. We are not only lumbering robots destined to follow some genetic program, researchers have noted some subtle manifestations of female health and fertility, including waist-to-hip ratios and patterns of facial and body symmetry. Humans use a rich and complex repertoire of mating tactics, many of which we do not fully understand. And that brings us to our take-home message for section 11.12. As a consequence of male to female differences in initial reproductive investment, males tend to increase their reproductive success by mating with many females and have evolved to compete among themselves to get the opportunity to mate. Moving on. If a male simply abandons a female after mating and searches for other mating opportunities, there is no risk of his investing further in offspring that are not his. This is one way to minimize the potential costs associated with paternity uncertainty. If you don't play, you can't lose. This strategy, however, is not necessarily the most effective way for a male to maximize his reproductive success. Indeed, if a male has multiple matings but no offspring survive, that behavior is not evolutionarily successful. Consequently, in species for which more offspring survive with greater parental investment, males have an incentive to invest in their offspring, even though such behavior makes them vulnerable to paternity uncertainty. It is common for a male to reduce this vulnerability through some form of mate guarding. In contrast to a female, who can be certain that any offspring emerging from her body are hers, a male inhabits a quote-unquote danger zone that lasts as long as the female is fertile. If she mates with any other males during this time, the offspring she produces may not be his. The male benefits by minimizing his risk during the danger zone. In this period, mate guarding is particularly common. Mate guarding methods range from the simple to the macabre. If a male wants to ensure that a female will not mate with another male, then why bother to stop mating at all? Some mating animals remain physically coupled for a long time. Among houseflies, even though the male completes the transfer of sperm to the female in 10 minutes of copulation, he does not separate from her for a full hour. Moths go even further and continue to mate for a full 24 hours, and some frog species stay conjoined for several months. So, in a slightly subtler form of mate guarding that occurs in reptiles, insects, and many mammalian species, after copulation, males block the passage of additional sperm into the female's reproductive tract by producing a copulatory plug. Formed in the female reproductive tract from coagulated sperm and mucus, copulatory plugs can be very effective. Male garter snakes that encounter a female snake with a copulatory plug, for example, do not court or mate with her, treating her instead as if she was not available. A much more extreme form of mate guarding occurs in the black widow spider. The male breaks off his sexual organ inside of the female, preventing her from ever mating again, and thus ensuring that only his sperm will fertilize her eggs. But there is a trade-off. After mating, the female usually kills and eats the male. In consuming her mate's nutrient-filled body, the female gets resources that help her to produce the offspring. And that brings us to the take-home message for section 11.13. Mate guarding can, in general, increase reproductive success by additional mating opportunities for a partner, and it can improve a male's reproductive success by increasing his paternity certainty and thus reducing his vulnerability when he invests in offspring. Moving on. Each December, male elephant seals appear on the islands off the coast of Northern California, where they compete with each other for the possession of the beach. Through bloody fights, they establish dominance hierarchies with the bigger males, which are 13 feet long and weigh more than 2 tons, generally winning. In mid-January, the females arrive and are ready to mate. They congregate in large groups on just a few prime beaches. Because the females stick close together, the biggest males who control the prime beaches gain access to almost all of the females. In one study that observed 115 males, the 5 highest-ranking males fathered 85% of the offspring. While every female will mate and produce offspring, the majority of males never get the chance to mate during the 10 to 20 years of their lives. So, the elephant seal's mating pattern exemplifies polygamy, a system in which some individuals attract multiple mates while other individuals attract none. Polygamous mating systems can be subdivided into polygyny, in which individual males mate with multiple females, and polyandry, in which individual females mate with multiple males. Polygamy can be contrasted to monogamy, in which most individuals mate with and remain with just one other individual. Polygamy and monogamy are two types of mating systems which describe the patterns of mating behavior in a species. As we have seen, females are choosy about which males they mate with, and males compete for access to mating opportunities. Not surprisingly, multiple females often end up selecting the same male, usually a male with a resource-rich territory or a male with unusually pronounced physical features such as antler size. This female selection preference is the reason for the fancy ornamentation we see in male peacocks. Although male peacock's tail is like a giant bullseye to predators, the number of eye spots on the tail is directly related to how well he can attract a mate. With fewer than 140 eye spots, he gets no mates. At 150, he gets 2 to 3 mates on average, and with 160 eye spots, he gets 6 or more mates. So, identifying a population's mating systems is not as easy as the elephant seal example might lead us to believe. 3 issues in particular complicate the task. First, animals' mating behavior and their bonding behavior might be at odds. It might seem that a male and female have formed a pair bond in which they spend a high proportion of their time together, often over many years of sharing a quote-unquote home and contributing equally to parental care of offspring in what appears to be a monogamous relationship. Closer inspection, often including DNA analysis of the offspring, however, sometimes reveals that male or the female may actually be mating with other individuals in the population. Such a mating system might be described as a variation on polygamy. A second difficulty in defining a species' mating system arises if the mating system varies within the species. For example, some individuals may be monogamous while others are polygamous, or individuals may change mating strategy over the course of their lives. A third difficulty is that males and females often differ in their mating behavior. In the elephant seals described earlier, it could be said that the females are all mating monogamously while the males are polygamous. Thus, the examination of birds and mammals in general reveals one sharp split. As described earlier, the vast majority of female mammals make a greater parental investment than do male mammals. In birds, females and males have a more equal parental investment. Does the difference in parental investment patterns in birds and mammals lead to different mating systems? Yes, in mammals, polygyny is the most common mating system across large groups, from rodents to primates. Polygyny is a consequence of the significant female investment and lesser male investment. In contrast, monogamy is by far the most common mating system in birds, although, in most cases, this does not mean they have one mate for their lifetime, but rather that within each new mating season, they are monogamous. So, what of humans? Across a variety of cultures, males consistently have greater variance in reproductive success than do females. That is, some males have very high reproductive success and many others have little or none. Data from one of the first investigations of this phenomenon are showed in the figure on your slide. This is figure 11.24 on page 332. This data came from a study of the Xavante Indians of Brazil, a pre-industrial population subsisting primarily as hunting and gatherers with no access to reliable birth control. The average number of children, 3.6, does not differ between men and women, but the range does. Some men have very large numbers of offspring, as many as 23, and many have none. There is significant less variability in reproductive success from one woman to another. A 2010 study using data from 7,710 women and men living in the contemporary United States similarly found significant greater variance in reproductive success among men than among women. Some differences in the variance in reproductive success among males and females, which can be significantly influenced by socialization and other cultural forces, are generally associated with polygynous mating systems. However, the difference between the sexes found in the Brazilian study is quite small when compared with other mammalian species and is close to that seen in populations with monogamous mating systems. It seems that humans have a mating system close to, but not completely monogamous. So that brings us to our take-home message for section 11.15. The number of mates and the reproductive success of males and females vary among different types of mating systems. These variables are influenced by the relative amounts of male and female parental investment. Moving on, male elephant seals are 3 to 4 times the size of female elephant seals. In contrast, the males and females of the majority of bird species, but certainly not all of them, are the same size. In some of the species, even expert bird watchers have difficulty distinguishing between the sexes, except where the female bird is carrying eggs. When the sexes of a species differ in size or appearance, the divergence is called sexual dimorphism. But why do species have such dramatic differences in the degree to which males and females resemble each other? Well, that's because body size is an important clue to mating behavior. We have seen that male elephant seals have a winner-take-all tournament for control of the beach. The winning male has access to mating opportunities. Because the largest individual will have the most offspring, there is selection pressure on males for larger and larger body size. In contrast, there is no selection for larger body size among female elephant seals because females of any size can mate. This leads to the dramatic size difference between the sexes. Coloration, too, can be a clue to mating behavior, because females of some polygynous species choose the males with the brightest or flashiest coloration rather than the largest males. Male-male competition sometimes results in differences in physical appearance between the sexes. What happens when there is a little male-male competition for mates? Among bird species, males can make a significant investment in their offspring. Eggs must be incubated, and because chicks emerge in a poorly developed condition, it takes 2 parents to raise them. So a pair tends to stay together for a season. If each female can pair up with only one male, there isn't much competition for mates. Also, without male-male competition, there is little selection for increased size. As a consequence, there is little sexual size dimorphism in most bird species. In turn, we can make some predictions about the parental practices of some species just by looking at a picture of a male and a female and examining the ratio of body sizes. If the two are dramatically different, as in elephant seals, we can hypothesize that the smaller sex is doing most of the care of the offspring and that the species is most likely to be polygamous than monogamous. And that brings us to our take-home message for section 11.16. In polygynous species, differences in the level of competition among individuals of each sex for access to mating opportunities result in larger males than females and other differences in appearance. In monogamous species, there are few such sex differences. Moving on, not all animals need to open their mouths to have something important to communicate. When the female silkworm moth is ready to mate, she releases a potent chemical called bombicol into the air. As the molecules of the chemical come in contact with the bushy antennae of the male silkworm moth, who might be 3 miles away, he recognizes the mate attractant and responds by flying upwind, looking for the source of the chemical until he zeroes in on the female and they mate. This is just one example of communication, an action or signal on the part of one individual that informs or alerts the behavior of another individual. So a huge range of animal behaviors require communication, including defending territory, alerting individuals to threats, announcing one's readiness for mating, establishing one's position in a dominance hierarchy, and caring for offspring. There are 3 types of signals that are most common among animals. One is chemicals. Molecules released by an individual into the environment that trigger behavioral responses in other individuals are called pheromones. They include the airborne mate attractant of the silkworm moth, territory markers such as those in dog urine, and trail markers used by ants. Second is acoustics. Sounds that trigger behavioral responses are abundant in the natural world. They include the alarm calls of the Belding's ground squirrels, as described earlier, the complex songs of birds, whales, frogs, and crickets vying for mates, and the territorial howling of wolves. Third is visual. Individuals often display visual signals of threat, dominance, or health and vigor. Examples include the male baboon's baring of its teeth and the vivid tail feathers of the male peacock. So with increasingly complex forms of communication, increasingly complex information can be conveyed. One extreme case is the honeybee waggle dance. When a honeybee scout returns to the hive after successfully locating a source of food, she performs a set of maneuvers on the honeycomb that resemble a figure eight while wiggling her abdomen. Based on the angle at which she dances relative to the sun's position in the sky and the duration of her dance, the bees that observe the dance are able to leave the hive and locate the food source. The complexity and power of the waggle dance raises an important question. At what point does communication become language? Language is a very specific type of communication in which arbitrary symbols represent concepts and a system of rules called grammar dictates the way that the symbols can be manipulated to communicate and express ideas. It is not always easy to identify language. For example, vervet monkeys live in groups, and when an individual sees a predator coming, it makes an alarm call to warn the others in the group. Unlike in most other alarm-calling species, the vervet monkey's alarm call differs depending on whether the predator is a hawk, a snake, or a leopard. Likewise, the response of other vervet monkeys to the call reflects the type of predator approaching. The snake alarm causes individuals to stand on their toes and look down. The leopard alarm causes individuals to quickly climb the nearest tree. And the hawk alarm causes vervet monkeys to look to the sky. Does alarm calling in vervet monkeys or the honeybee's waggle dance constitute language? This is debatable. Is the form of American Sign Language taught to chimps and orangutans a language? There are opinions on both sides. Interestingly, the great apes have been shown to have a capacity for creating new signs, expressing abstract ideas, and referring to things that are distant in time or space, important features of human language. One thing that is certain, however, is that human language is near the most complex end of communication on the continuum. Language influences many of the behaviors discussed throughout this chapter. The evolution of reciprocal altruism, for example, may be influenced by language, as language makes it easier for individuals to convey their needs and resources to each other. Similarly, in courtship and the maintenance of reproductive relationships, language gives individuals a tool for conveying complex information related to the resources and the value they may bring to the interaction. And that brings us to our take-home message for section 11.17. Methods of communication have evolved among animal species, enabling them to convey information about their condition and situation. These abilities influence fitness and the evolution of almost all other behaviors. Moving on, among natterjack toads found in northern Europe, males produce booming calls to attract females. Because females desire large males and size determines the volume of the calls, females seek out the loudest croaker. They are drawn by calls that can be heard a mile away and are often louder than the legal noise limit for a car engine. The natterjack's call is an honest signal, one that cannot be faked and is given when both the individual making the signal and the individual responding to it have the same interest. An honest signal carries the most accurate information about an individual or situation, and animals that respond to signals of any sort have evolved to value honest signals. A loud natterjack's call, for example, cannot be faked by a small natterjack toad.
When one animal can increase its fitness by deceiving another, deception can also be expected to evolve. An example might be a baby bird's begging for food from their parent. If an allele causes a chick to exaggerate its need for food, leads to faster growth and better health for that individual, the allele is likely to increase in frequency in the population. Communication and signaling, therefore, are features of populations that are continually evolving. Over time, this evolutionary arms race between honest signals and deception can lead to both increasingly unambiguous signals and ever more sophisticated patterns of deception. And that brings us to our take-home message for section 11.18. Animals have evolved to rely primarily on signals that cannot easily be faked to gain the maximum amount of information.